So today I want to go over what may be one of the easiest endgame builds to put together for the Druid in Season 14, and this is going to be a pure Lightning Druid build. We have Lightning Shred as our main spender or spammable ability, we have passive Lightning Storms, we have Cataclysm as our massive AoE ultimate skill, and then we have just a bunch of other passive damage boosts always being cast. And we first have to go over our Talisman set because this is really how we scale a lot of our damage, and this is the Storm Shepherd set. Now I do already have a Mythic Seal, which is the one that reduces the amount of items you need to actually make the 5 set. You don't actually need this. I just have this because I actually got a good roll on it, but you really just need the 5 set of Storm Shepherd. Now the 2 set is actually where most of the damage comes from, and a lot of people are kind of confused at how this works. So at a baseline, Storm skills no longer cost Spirit to cast, which is really good, especially earlier on before you need to scale your damage more. But when you use a Storm skill, it drains all available Spirit, and based upon how much Spirit that skill cast drains, you will get 0.5% damage per Spirit consumed for 2 seconds, up to 60%. Now additional bonuses may stack but do not refresh. Now how this works is, let's say we cast a Shred at 120 Spirit, it consumes all of that Spirit, that'll max out at 60% damage increase for 2 seconds. But let's say right after we cast another Shred that only uses 100 Spirit, that would give us another 50% damage increase, but it wouldn't refresh or increase the duration of the first stack, but they both still give their damage bonuses. So as you optimize your build more, you will have more Spirit generation, which will mean you could constantly just get a ton more of these pretty big damage boosting stacks. This is one of, if not the strongest 2 set pieces in the game because of the massive amount of damage increase you could actually get. So essentially you just want to be able to get 120 Spirit or close to that with, let's say, every single one of your Storm Shred casts, because that's the main thing that's draining through this. But there is a bug that still exists from Season 13 that seems to be building up these stacks without actually spending any Spirit, and we'll go over that with the skill. The 2 set is just a damage reduction. We now have Cyclone Armor for free, meaning it doesn't have to be in our bar, and it gives us 30% damage reduction. And then the 5 set was also buffed. So Storm skills have a 20% chance to double cast and a 5% chance to triple cast. Both of these, whether it be a double or triple cast, gain a 500% multiplicative damage increase. So that is another really massive damage boost, but just being more of an RNG factor. And you will definitely notice this. You will just get massive bursts of a damage increase, which is pretty crazy. And then for your other charms, I'm just using a Rust Bitten Dirk for my unique charm, which is you deal up to 120% increased damage to isolated enemies. Now, the reason I'm just constantly using this is because I don't really have a better unique charm for general combat, and most content ends up taking you to a boss that you're fighting by itself anyway. So this is a really big damage increase when you're specifically fighting against bosses. Now, there will be other options for this that I'll go over when I do future versions of this build, because there's legitimately a handful of other very strong versions of this build. You just kind of change up a few things and it completely changes up the power of it. So there's a bunch of other stuff you could use in this slot. Another really good one is Godslayer's Crown, but realistically, until you get super optimized, you can kind of use whatever unique charm here you want. Now that brings us into our skill tree, starting with Lightning Storm. Now we are going to be using the Hero of the Storm variant that turns us into a toggleable passive skill. So you toggle it on and it just keeps casting Lightning Storm around you until you like get on a mount or go back to town or something like that. So it's completely passive. And this is the thing that I was saying is bugged when using it with our Storm Shepherd set. So normally if you use Lightning Storm with Hero of the Storm as a toggleable skill and you're not using the Storm Shepherd set, it'll drain your Spirit because that's what it's supposed to do. But if you use it with the Storm Shepherd set, it only takes Spirit when you turn it on, but it doesn't keep draining Spirit. But we know it is actually behind the scenes still consuming Spirit because we have a bunch of other abilities that put buffs on our bar or do things that we can more plainly see. That Lightning Storm is just still consuming that Spirit behind the scenes. It's just not actually draining our spirits visually, which is quite weird. So it seems that this is still also giving the damage buff from the 2-piece of Storm Shepherd set. It's just not taking Spirit, which is actually a good good thing and makes the build a bit stronger because we're just passively getting a bunch of different benefits for Lightning Storm being on as a passive effect. It's just not actually draining our usable spirit, even though behind the scenes it's still considering it as draining spirit. So it's quite weird, but generally pretty strong. Top upgrade, we just increase its damage and even more against vulnerable enemies. Bottom upgrade, we get a movement speed increase while it's active, and make sure it's a werewolf skill. Then we have our main spammable ability, which is going to be Shred. This is just very strong. It's a good mobility skill. It has quite good damage. We have some uniques that build into it. We are using Berserking, so when we Shred, we gain Berserking that stacks up. So we'll just always have Berserking, which is a damage increase and movement speed increase. Then cast speed is increased by 20%. And cast speed is another bucket of attack speed, essentially. So you have attack speed that you can go up to 100%. Cast speed is a separate bucket compared to that. So if you also get 100% attack speed with this, this is just really good, more attack speed, essentially. And then the variant we're using is Storm Shred, turns it into a storm skill, increases its damage. What it also doesn't say here is that it also has like this cleaving effect where it'll send lightning to nearby enemies. So this does gain like a chain lightning effect to it as well. And it'll obviously still be a werewolf skill. Then we have our defensives. We have a lot of defensives. 3 of these aren't on our bar and they are just passively used. So for our Earthen Bulwark, this will passively be used through our rune set, which we are just using the runes. So you use some amount of your max resource and then it'll cast Earthen Bulwark through our rune. That means it also gets all of the upgrades we have here and it just goes off of how this works. So even though we have a bunch of points into this, so it gives us a bigger barrier, and the upgrades, we're not actually putting this on our bar, it auto casts constantly from our rune. The top upgrade, we increase its duration and increase its base absorb. The variant we're taking is Traventine, so we get stacks of resolve, which will just give us more armor and it does a little bit of damage. And then the bottom upgrade, we get Overpower, which will increase our damage slightly, but we also have a glyph that increases our damage even more. Then we have a Cyclone Armor. This doesn't need to be on our bar because of our charm set, and all we want this for in this build is to make us more tanky. So the variant is increases its armor by 100%. That is its passive effect. So we're gaining 91% bonus to all resist just from the passive effect of this. The bottom upgrade increases the bonus to all resistances. So this is just a big defensive increase that doesn't need to be on our bar. Then we have Blood Howl. Now this is also not going to be on our bar. We're using a unique that auto casts this and gives us a big damage increase pretty much at all times because it auto casts Blood Howl. Top upgrade increases our dodge by 20%, so a defensive increase, and bottom upgrade makes us unstoppable for 2 seconds, which plays pretty heavily into one of our other unique items. Now the variant we're using, I'm just using Hungering Howl because we don't really have something else that works very well, and this just increases all of the healing we receive by 50% for 5 seconds. Now our auto casting of Blood Howl happens every 4 seconds. This will be up 100% of the time. Now I haven't used Berserk Howl yet with this build because I do know sometimes with Berserk Howl, the poison application from this can actually deal some decent damage. So I'll have to test that out. The healing just actually feels pretty nice for this healing increase, especially since we have Fortified that'll constantly heal us when we're injured. But if you want some more damage, you can use Berserking Howl. I just don't know how much this poison is actually doing yet. Then a defensive we're actually having on our bar is Debilitating Roar. Now we are also using unique with this. So when this is active, we get a big damage boost. So the variant we're using is increases effects and durations by 50%. The side upgrade is we get 30% to our max life when this is active, so a big defensive increase. And then the other upgrade is it increases the duration and even more when fortified. So you just want to have this up 100% of the time, and this just makes enemies deal less damage at a baseline. But we will be getting a massive damage increase based off one of our uniques of this. Then we are using 2 companion skills that are going to be at our bars. First off, we have Wolves. The variant we're using is all Wolves upgrades are increased by 100%. The side upgrade we're taking is attack speed. When your wolves critically strike, you gain 40% attack speed for 10 seconds. So basically, just any time our wolves go and crit anything, we have a 40% attack speed. This will be at basically 100% of the time while we're in combat. So just a very big chunk of our attack speed cap is just directly through this basically passive skill. Then we have a Poison Creeper, which the only reason we're taking this is Fortify. We passively gain 10% Fortify every 3 seconds. This will essentially be giving us all of our Fortify, and it's just 2 very cheap passive effects we get that massively increase our power. Then finally, for our ultimate, 50 points into Cataclysm, a massive damage damaging ability. Top upgrade, we increase the duration by 4 seconds. Bottom upgrade, we don't need either of these really. The main one you would take is your Cataclysm, makes enemies vulnerable, but we have a legendary aspect on our boots that already does that for us. So make sure it's a werewolf skill, and then we're using Severe Storm. It doubles the amount of twisters and lightning bolts, and your lightning bolts can spawn a bunch of dancing bolts that actually deal some decent damage. So it just absolutely destroys everything everywhere. Also, a bug was fixed from the previous season where this is now a shape shifting skill. It didn't used to have that tag even when you use werewolf. So now Cataclysm is actually stronger. It gets a bunch of benefits from specifically a lot of our glyphs or legendary nodes. And then that brings us into our Paragon boards. First glyph is Headhunter for a bonus to all normal nodes within range. Secondary is increased damage to elites. Legendary is just increased damage. Then the first board we're taking is Lust for Carnage. Critical strikes with werewolf skills, restore 2 spirit, and deal massively increased damage. Basically, all of our damaging skills do this now. This is a big spirit gen and damage increase. The glyph we're taking is Dominate, a bonus to all rare nodes within range, and then a increase while we have Overpower, and our Earthen Bulwark will just constantly generate us Overpower. Legendary is increased damage. Then we're going over to the right, we're taking Thunderstruck. Storm skills do increased damage and have an increased critical strike chance, so that is quite strong. The crit chance is very nice, and then the massive damage increase. Then the glyph we're taking is Spirit, an increase to our critical strike damage. The secondary makes enemies take increased damage from you after being crit, stacking up. The legendary is increased critical strike damage. Then all the way over to the left, we are taking Ancestral Guidance. After spending 75 spirit, deal increased damage, which will be up all the time, and your ultimate deals increased damage based upon how much spirit when cast. So I think I have like 130 spirit or something, so make sure your spirit is filled when you use Cataclysm. That'll give it a big damage boost. The glyph is Keeper, another bonus to all rare nodes within range. We deal increased non-physical damage. The legendary is increased non-physical damage. Then we're going all the way up, and we are taking Constricted Tendrils, a massive damage increase to poison enemies, and then a pretty high chance lucky hit to poison enemies. This lucky hit will poison pretty much anything that would actually survive any amount of time, so then we get the massive damage increase to that poison enemy. And then Earth and Sky, which grants a bonus to all magic nodes within range. The secondary makes nature magic skills deal increased damage to CC'd or vulnerable. The legendary is increased nature magic damage. And then for our spirit boons, we have Gift of the Stag, gain 30 max spirit and 5 spirit per second. This is really big for damage for our ultimate and just spirit gen in general. And then I'm using Sight Talons. This was increased, so now it gives 10 crit and 15% lucky hit chance. Now, once I get better rolled gear and have better crit, I would switch this down to Overlord, which Storm skills have a 20% chance to grant 1 second ferocity, which will be increased attack speed. And then Storm skills gain increased cast speed. Now, cast speed is, again, another bucket of attack speed essentially, so this would actually be a bunch of additional attack speed. I just think the crit is generally better right now until I get better crit through other stuff. Then Avian Wraith, increased critical strike damage. Then we have Calamity, extend the duration of our ultimate by 35%, so our Cataclysm, and then Combo for the Storm, which is the lucky hit to reduce the cooldown of our ultimate. Cataclysm is very good. We want it up as much as possible. Then for our Mercenaries, you can really use whatever you want. I'm just using Subo just for his Seeker ability, and then I'm just using Aldkin with Fields of Languish that's slows and reduces the damage of enemies, and I just do that on any skill cast. But you could use whatever mercenaries you want. You could also use Rahir if you want more defensives. I just still like the enemy tracking of Subo. And then that brings us into every part of our gear, starting with our gems. In our weapons, we want a lightning damage multiplier. In one of your pieces of gear, you want willpower. And then for our rune sets, for my least important rune set, it's maintain at least 1 active summon for 5 seconds. This will gain you offering, and we are using the crit rune, so we gain up to 10% crit from this. This again is just because I don't have the best rolled gear for crit yet, so this is just passively gaining 10% crit essentially because we have so many companions. And then for our other set, which is more important, spend 300 of your max resource. That'll give us Earthen Bulwark. Now, because we're using Storm Shepherd set and because we have a bunch of spirit gen, we use 300% of our max resource very fast because we drain all of our resource when using any of our storm skills instantly. So we just get a new Earthen Bulwark every couple seconds. So this is very, very strong. In our jewelry, I'm just using all diamond gems for more resistances. Now, since we have so many more uniques in this build, we're going to go over our legendary aspects first, and we only have 2 offensive aspects on our offhand. We have Wild Fortified, you deal increased damage, which will be all the time. Then on our ring, we have you deal increased damage where you have a barrier, which through Earthen Bulwark will be all of the time. Then in our chest piece, we have you gain damage reduction and poison enemies deal less damage to you. Pretty much everything will be poisoned, so just a big damage reduction. Then on our boots, we have your storm skills skills make enemies vulnerable for 4 seconds, and you deal increased damage to vulnerable enemies. Now on our necklace, I do kind of have a role that isn't necessarily the best for this specific build, but because I'm going to be using this necklace for a bunch of other builds, I just use this. Distant enemies have a 20% chance to be stunned for 2 seconds when they hit you, and you deal increased damage to distant enemies. Now this does actually help with certain things. Our Cataclysm will constantly be getting the damage boost of this. It'll constantly stun enemies, which is nice. Our Lightning Storm can actually hit enemies at range, and our Shred actually chain lightning, so that can hit enemies. This is just a Shred build, so it's not as good as it could be, but still very strong. But that brings us to our uniques, and as you can see, everything else is a unique. So a lot of your gear is uniques, meaning you have pretty clear upgrade paths. So like half my uniques aren't mythics yet. That means I could get massive damage increases or defensive increases. So starting with our weapon, we have Waxing Gibbous. This was buffed. Your Shred deals a lot more damage and has a 33% chance to land an additional 4 times. So this essentially will just give a massive damage increase to Shred and allow it to strike a bunch of additional times randomly, which is a massive damage increase. Then our necklace is Malefic Crescent. So the special effect of this is Blood Howl is automatically cast when you shapeshift into a werewolf, and every 4 seconds while at werewolf. So we'll always be in werewolf, so we Blood Howl every 4 seconds, and we get a massive damage boost for 4 seconds whenever Blood Howl is triggered. So we get all of the different effects and buffs of Blood Howl, and now this gives us a massive damage boost at all times because I passively uses it, so this is just a massive damage increase. Then we're using Dirge of Erudai. Storm skills you cast grant 1 spirit and deal pretty massively increased damage. Double this against vulnerable enemies. All of our enemies will always be vulnerable because of our aspect that makes storm skills apply vulnerable. So this just generates us a ton of spirit and gives us a 92% damage boost at all times. Pretty massive. On our helmet, we're using the Birthright helmet. So Cyclone Armor is automatically triggered over 5 seconds. We don't really care about that in this build, but Cyclone's Armor passive grants you 30% damage reduction. So this is just more defensives into our skill that we don't even need on our bar. Because of the 3 set of our Storm Shepherd set, we now gain a 60% damage reduction just from Cyclone Armor. It doesn't need to be on our bar, and then it also gives us close to 100% increase passively. So our Cyclone Armor is really giving us a lot of our defensives, and that's pretty much all this helmet is used for. Then on our gloves, Dark Howl. Debilitating Roar is now a werewolf skill, and Debilitating Roar increases your damage by up to 80% while in werewolf form for the duration. So we're always in werewolf form. We cast our Debilitating Roar that lasts like 14 or 15 seconds now, and we gain a massive damage boost that whole time. So just another very big damage boost. Then on our legs, this one's very important for Spirit Gen. You deal increased damage and gain 50 resource while unstoppable and for 5 seconds after. So this just gives us a damage boost, but we gain 50 spirit per second while we're unstoppable and 5 seconds after. Now because our Blood Howl is giving us unstoppable, this will be up 100% of the time, and this is a massive increase to our Spirit generation, which gives us massive damage boost from our Storm Shepherd set. Tibalt's Will is actually very important for the build, even though it wouldn't seem like it. And like usual, there will be a build planner in the description that goes over the stats, so you can just look at that for stats to make it a bit easier. Now, one thing I will say is getting like a resource generation on your helmet, maybe even getting resource generation other places, will actually give you a massive damage boost. It's just really hard to calculate. You essentially just want as many shreds as possible to consume 120 spirit, because that'll give you the maximum damage boost. The helmet is just a really good place to get a big resource generation roll, but you can get it other areas, and even on things like our rings where we have cooldown reduction as our tempering, it may actually be better to get resource generation. I'll just need to do some more testing on that. But that is the entirety of this build. It is a very, very strong build. You could do everything in the end game. It's destroying everything in Torment 12 right now. You can easily go farm high enough pit runs to be able to upgrade your glyphs. And I will be doing more versions of this build, whether it be an updated version of this specific one or different variants, that even makes the potential of this type of build much stronger. But this one is also just incredibly nice because of Cataclysm, because let's say you're doing an Infernal Hordes run. Well, usually a Shred build isn't actually as good as you would think for that, because even though you could dash around everything, your movement still isn't that good to be able to do it as consistently as you would want. Having something like Cataclysm just destroys everything on your screen and off screen. So for certain content, this build is just very, very good, and pretty much anything in Torment 12 is going to be very easy for this build. But that's all I want to go over, so thanks for watching.